Most culture problems in veterinary medicine are not caused by incompetence. They're actually caused by expectations that were never clearly expressed. So think about a time if you've ever walked away from a shift just feeling frustrated, feeling annoyed, but if someone asked you exactly what went wrong, you can't quite put your finger on it. You'd actually struggle to articulate it. So nothing dramatic happened, there was no major conflict, yet something just felt off. So very often this feeling is not because we're working with bad people, so to speak. It's about unspoken expectations. So today we are talking about the invisible cost of unspoken expectations. And these costs are on performance, relationships, and leadership in veterinary medicine. Welcome to the Resilient Vet podcast. We help vets and teams build lasting, fulfilling careers through sustainable mind-body strategies. I'm Dr. Jennifer Edwards, and I'm a leadership and executive coach, former practice owner, and the founder of the Core Element Leadership Framework. And after 25 years in this profession, I am now helping veterinary professionals and leaders with the inner part of leadership, strengthening how they think, communicate, and lead so they can perform at a high level without sacrificing well-being.
And hello, my name is Aaron Shaw. I am the founder of Project VetSpan, where I help vet professionals and teams build physical and emotional durability so you can thrive in what is very clearly a challenging field. I am an occupational therapist, strength and conditioning specialist, and long-term coach this is actually year 30. And I'm married to a veterinarian. And after many years of my wife suggesting that I focus some attention on the veterinary space because of the challenges in vet med, I finally listened. And so now I am lucky enough to be on the Resilient Vet podcast. And we get to talk about some great topics that help the human beings of veterinary medicine, help everybody thrive. And I think this is a really interesting topic for me. Unspoken expectations. Part of my career, I own a human physical therapy and performance practice, and have felt the ups and downs and challenges of starting a practice from scratch when it was just myself to growing teams. And as roles change and as clinic size change and demands change, and in hindsight, turns out that I had, like all parts of hindsight, I suppose, looking back on what I wish I knew then that I know now, I think the topic of having clear expectations can make work so much more enjoyable, relationships so much more enjoyable. So I'm excited to dig into this today. So Jennifer, why don't you start off by maybe telling us what do you mean by an unspoken expectation, and what is an example of it?
Yeah, so an unspoken expectation is pretty much that, right? So we have an expectation about something that needs to be done, the way it should be done, the manner it should be done, but we don't specifically communicate it. We assume that people know, and or sometimes we communicate it partly, right? So either way, there's left a lack of clarity in the interaction between the people. And where they show up, pretty much everywhere that you can think of. So it can be in medical protocols, client interactions, the way we communicate with clients, the timeliness in which we respond to clients, case flow with support staff or veterinary technicians in how much initiative should they take versus how much should they wait for direction, emotional tone that we should take in the room, what it looks like in that practice to be a team player. Right? Those things are different in every animal hospital. Sure, there's going to be some crossover, but there's always nuances. And the exact combination of the way things operate are very unique to every practice. So when somebody comes on board, we assume that we have shared standards because we share a profession, we share, some of us as doctors or whatever role, there might be a shared educational experience. However, even that is different. But none of that really means that we have shared expectations.
So we can see them kind of everywhere throughout practice. And I think maybe even if, again, looking back from personal experience, if any of us has this internal dialogue that says, that's not how we do things, that may be a flag. Like if you're looking at somebody else do something and you're thinking like, that's not what we're supposed to be doing, that may indicate a mismatch perhaps of that unspoken expectation, what I think versus how it's actually working. But I would definitely sounds like it impacts everywhere. If you have a mismatch of what's expected among different people, it's going to pop up anywhere and everywhere, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you know when you're feeling, if you have this feeling or internal dialogue, how do you know if it really is about an unspoken expectation? How do you know if that's what's really going on?
Well, typically there's a bit of a pattern that occurs, right? And not even consciously. Like sometimes people just kind of notice that they're in it. So what happens is there's some sort of standard that a person has, whether for themselves, whether for other people, whether it's practice-wide, and they're going along and someone in some capacity behaves differently. Okay, that person does it their way, so to speak. And we make that difference mean something, right? Like so much of our experience in everything is how we interpret things and the meaning that we apply. So instead of interpreting it as, oh, that's just another way to do it, or, oh, actually I forgot to tell her, here's how we do it. We interpret that difference in behavior as that the person doesn't care, that they're maybe not committed, or maybe even worse, that they're not competent, right? So we assign a meaning to that behavior that is usually about that person and typically not very flattering, because when we have that unfulfilled expectation, we're often in some way annoyed or frustrated, right? So inside of that, we're not going to probably look very highly upon that other person. So then that frustration builds. But instead of clarifying with the person, sitting down and saying, hey, I'm curious, about how you did that, or just for some clarity on how we do it here, very often what happens is the leader or the coworker that's frustrated either steps in to try to do it themselves, or they try to micromanage. They might just complain to someone else, and so there goes the gossip that we all know about. They might just withdraw because now they're annoyed or mad at the other person, or perhaps none of the above. But then next week when something happens, they explode at the person, and now they have a disproportionate response to something else that was bothering them. So when there's resentment present, that's often the signal that something has not been clearly expressed, that something has not been agreed upon, because expectations are not unidirectional, right? There's an agreement. Like if I am a doctor or an owner and I have a veterinary technician and I say, hey, when we do rooms, here's how we do them, typically in a training process, and then that person says, okay, yep, got it. So there's like an agreement. So now we both have that same expectation. If there's no agreement, then there actually might not be a mutual expectation. And when it's one-sided, then obviously that leads to that resentment. And here's a really important key distinction that if there's one thing to walk away from today with, you cannot have a disappointment without a prior expectation. So think about that for a minute. Try to, in your mind, consider any situation where anyone is disappointed and there was not a prior expectation. And so in the world of ownership, in the world of being responsible for ourselves and how we self-lead, which is always the prerequisite to leading others, we can start to be responsible for the expectations that we set, and therefore the disappointments that we experience. So when we're disappointed, we can say, what was my expectation here that led to this disappointment? And then question, and did I fully express that? Was I clear about that? Because it's not necessarily always the other person's fault.
So when you talk about the challenges, the feelings of this mismatch in expectations and communication, some of the times it can feel really personal. Why does it feel so personal sometimes when this happens?
Yeah, it definitely can feel personal, and that's part of the reason why we get upset and blame other people. When we look at high achieving professionals, of which the majority of people in veterinary medicine and in every role, I think, can fall into that category, we start to sometimes equate our competence with our identity, right? So who we, quote, are starts to equal what we know and how well we can do what we do, right? So when someone is behaving differently than what we have set as our internal standard or our standard for the practice or whatever the situation is, and that is not met, and then so therefore that disappointment arises in the form of a frustration and an annoyance, whatever word resonates, it can feel personal and it can start to trigger thoughts and feelings like, why am I the only one, holding the bar up around here? Or how come I'm the only one who cares? Why do I care more than everybody else does? Why am I the only one carrying this whole team and this whole practice, right? And of course, that's rarely true, right? Those generalized statements, but in the moment, it can start to feel that way because other people are not upholding the standard or the expectation that you have. And so it feels like they just don't care and that it doesn't matter, right? So what happens is it starts to lead to a lot of blame and maybe even a victim mentality, as if almost like they are doing something to you and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So, but the truth is that while you're upset because, not you, but a person is upset that the others aren't upholding the bar, the vast majority of time, they don't even know that there is a bar. Or they know there's a bar, but it's this constantly fluctuating bar that they don't really even know what it means or what it looks like. So communication is very important, obviously, to gain clarity and set expectations that are clear. But it's not just about communication. It's about this situation where our identity, which is why it becomes so personal, is colliding with assumptions, right? So I have this identity that requires this standard, yet at the same time, I'm having these assumptions that other people should fulfill, and there starts to become this clash. And so then inside of that frustration and that breakdown, oftentimes we just kind of lash out and blame other people.
It sounds like this is, it's almost emotional just hearing you talk about these things. I think I can think back, we should all can think back to relationships, work and private, that there's a thread of this that's unfortunately been in there somewhere, that unspoken expectations. But I can see how this really can be a piece of what a lot of people would talk about, a toxic work environment, perhaps, like, or if a piece of this is I feel like that toxic work environment, there's probably a whole lot of things that can go into it. But this, everything you've been talking about so far could be a piece of the puzzle, that things just don't feel good, don't feel healthy in the work environment, where a large part of it may actually be this mismatch, this lack of clarity, lack of communications on, especially, what resonated with me, when you're talking about the bar that changes. Like, maybe we all understand, like, oh yeah, there's a certain bar, but you and I may see that bar differently or at different levels. And I think I'm fine, you think you're fine, but we may look at each other and say, like, this is not fair. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And so I could see how that could spiral out of control over time, perhaps. So what happens if this never gets addressed? That's like the elephant in the room. I'm sure we've both been in clinics or known people in clinics, and you just almost feel the tension by walking in there. And it probably wasn't just the day, like there's something that is like growing over time. So what happens if you don't do anything?
Yeah. Well, a few thoughts on that. So yes, toxic work culture, right? Like everything you just said. And that what's growing over time is actually an energy inside of a business. It's not just a veterinary hospital. When you can walk in the door and feel it, it's like, what is it that you're feeling? And people are like, I don't know. There was just something about that place. That's energy, right? And so while we all bring our own personal energy, there's also a collective energy of a team. And then there's a collective energy of the business as an entity in and of itself. And that's actually palpable, right? It's hard to put words to it. And some people say, I don't know, there was just a vibe, right? But that's what that is. And so when this never gets addressed, that's exactly what starts to happen. Right. And so people are frustrated, people are disappointed, and it's both directions, right? Employees, staff have expectations of leadership, or doctors or owners and doctors and leadership have expectations of staff. Like it goes in every which way, and even longitudinal or even laterally. So people on the same team, the veterinary technician team, for example, might have expectations of each other. And so people just start walking around frustrated. And there becomes this kind of like chronic low-grade irritation where people start to disengage, distrust. They might gossip. I mean, that's one of the biggest hallmarks of toxic workplaces is this like gossip and, bad-mouthing and all the things that go on in the break room. People may start to resist change or resist suggestions from other people, try to micromanage. Well, I can't trust you to do it, right? So I'm going to hover over you while you do it. And this is where we also start to see leaders burning out, right? And that's, obviously one of my passions is leadership and leadership resilience. And one of the things that will lead to leadership burnout is this happening around them. They don't understand why, because if they knew, they obviously it wouldn't be present. And then there's the proverbial, throw your hands up and just, I just, whatever, I can't like this. This is just hopeless. Right. So what happens is that when standards are implied and they're not explicit, they're not written down or communicated clearly, there starts to become a state of unpredictability. Right. And people don't know what to expect. They don't know what you want. They don't know what's going to disappoint you. Where is that bar? What is good enough? And so then the proverbial sentiment becomes nothing we ever do is good enough. And then that can start to become this undercurrent energy of the team culture. And then you get some people that just try harder and harder and harder and just can't feel like they succeed. And then you get the rest of them that are like, you know what, screw it. And they disengage and they're like, whatever. And that's when leaders start to say, I don't understand. Why doesn't anybody care? Why is everybody so disengaged? And a lot of times that's just slowly what happens is it erodes over time. And then there's problems with retention and productivity. And people don't step up and make decisions because they're afraid it's going to be the wrong decision. They don't really know what's expected. And then, of course, what is all of that impact? Client experience and revenue. Because at the end of the day, we're running businesses. So it's important to remember that, the saying, clarity is kindness. And that's very true, but it's also operationally strategic, right? Like we need clarity to run effective businesses, teams, and create environments that thrive.
Yeah, sounds like what comes to mind is when you mentioned a little bit like ownership. Like it's, I guess the question would be some of this frustration. If I'm frustrated, I have to own some of this myself. You talk about with like the gossiping and that sort of behavior. Sometimes it's like pointing outward at everything, and which may be an easy thing to do. Behind closed doors is kind of point and blame, but is it possible that some of these frustrations that we feel are actually more about us than somebody else, perhaps?
Perhaps.
Asking for a friend?
Asking for a friend, right? Well, Aaron,
Yeah.
yes, in fact, yeah, they are. And that's oftentimes what's so difficult for people to see, right? Because when we're frustrated, when we're annoyed, and it's very blatant that person X, Y, and Z are just not doing what they're supposed to do, that's what we're focused on, is that behavior in that moment, right? And so to get the clarity to be able to turn around and look at self is part of that self-awareness that actually leads to really powerful leadership. But it usually is. And it's kind of like what I said before. If we know that you cannot have a disappointment without a prior expectation, then we can each choose to start to take ownership of our disappointments. Now, ownership or responsibility is not fault. You know, it's not necessarily a leader's fault that their staff is sitting around on their cell phones. Well, that's a separate conversation, but like it's not about fault when we take ownership. It's not my fault that I had a disappointment. But when I take ownership, I start to just say, where can I choose to be responsible? Where can I have some agency in the situation? Because it's not about someone failing necessarily. It's about us holding a standard that we never truly articulated. So in a moment when I can just pause, it doesn't mean I'm not allowed to be annoyed, but I can just pause and say, okay, let me take a look. I'm annoyed. I'm disappointed. Where can I be responsible for expectations? First, let me define what were they? Just reverse it. What expectation was not fulfilled that led to the current disappointment? Just define it, write it down. And then say, okay, that was the expectation I had. Was it clearly articulated? Was it communicated? Is it written down? What word was it clear? And sometimes the answer to that question is going to be yes. You know, and there are people they clearly know the expectations and they choose not to follow what's expected. And that's a whole separate conversation, right, in leadership. Sometimes that's actually okay, and sometimes it's not. But very often we can look and see where maybe something was not communicated or not fully communicated, and that's what we're talking about today. And so there's this expectation of alignment without clarity that it just doesn't work for anyone. It's not fair. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is we want to name what we expect, and we want to also invite agreement. When we're training people, we say, you know, is this something you can agree to? Are you clear? Do you have questions? Maybe repeat back to me what you're hearing, right? So that we're all on the same page.
And is any of this different for the roles within the practice, like a practice owner versus an associate?
I mean, I think it's different in context, but everybody experiences it, right? Like I said earlier, it doesn't matter what the role and whether it's a vertical in the other direction or a lateral expectation, or quite frankly, with our friends, our partners, our children. It's kind of everywhere.
Every human.
Yeah. Right. Every human that we interact with, even the clerk at the store, right? We have an expectation of how they're going to smile at us or whatever. Owners very often have, as a former practice owner too, I can say this. I remember, like, I had privy to information that other people didn't. I had a view of the practice, a bird's eye view that other people didn't have. And I even remember times where I caught myself having an expectation that people just saw things the way I saw it. And they didn't. A, because they couldn't see it, and B, because it's not their business. Mm-hmm. And it's just they don't carry the weight that an owner carries. And, you know, associate veterinarians, you know, have expectations that are put upon them or that they put upon others as far as communication and how they write records and how much time it takes to load a room, or how much time it takes for them to be in the room as a doctor and when notes will be done. And like, I could go on and on and on and on. There's also very often unpredictable feedback, right? So then that opportunity to clarify expectations becomes lost. So there's different roles, but at the end of the day, it's still the same gap in clarity.
So what do you say with somebody who thinks or says out loud, do I really have to spell this out?
Yeah. And it's a fair question, because it can get annoying, especially on employee number 20 after 10 years. But the answer is yes, you do. Or you have somebody who works for you that fully understands everything and they do it for you. In leadership, clarity is kindness. Clarity is what works. Clarity is what has integrity. Without integrity, nothing works, right? So if something matters enough to frustrate you, it matters enough to articulate it. Period. You know, there's really not much more to say about it. Expecting people to read your mind is not a strategy, and it just leads to drama and upset.
Yeah, it's almost like a kind of a self-inflicted stressor. If without clarity, if you're not going to put it out there, you have to really adjust your expectations. And then if there's not going to be clarity for you and those around you, then you're kind of choosing to just roll with the punches and have mismatched expectations along the way. So it's in everybody's best interest to take the time to clarify these things. So if somebody's listening right now, what's a real down to earth practical thing that somebody could do to start addressing this tomorrow?
What I would suggest is to get out a piece of paper, a notebook, whatever, and identify a frustration, a recurring frustration that you have right now. If I were to say, what's one complaint you have at work? Oh, well, my team never or always, or the doctors won't, fill in the blank. Write it down and just start to unpack it. Just reverse engineer it and say, okay, specifically, what is the complaint? What is the disappointment associated with the complaint? Well, I'm disappointed because they, he, she, whatever, fill in the blank. And then say, okay, cool, that's my disappointment. And I would preface this by saying if you can approach this exercise out of curiosity and not judgment, you'll get a lot further. Let go of judgment, let go of whose fault it is, or I didn't express, or they should have, let go of all that. And just reverse engineer it into what was the expectation that I had that led to this disappointment, without worrying about whether or not the expectation was valid or not. Well, they should have known, or, I'm perfectly justified in expecting that. That's not what this is about. So once you figure out what that expectation was, then think truly and honestly, have you clearly stated that expectation? Have you made it clear, and have the other people or the other person agreed? Was there agreement? Because when an expectation there's a standard, there's agreement, and then there's accountability, all on top of an expectation. That's what works. That's when the expectation does not lead to a disappointment, right? And that's when we're like, okay, cool. Had an expectation, it was fulfilled, and we go on. When any one of those elements, either the standard, the agreement, or the accountability is missing, that's when we have that disappointment. That's when we get frustrated and annoyed. So that to me would be the first step towards starting to change, because if you don't know what to do differently, how do you start to do anything differently? And we all have our own examples in life everywhere. I mean, we're always disappointed. Most people, we have annoyances. We have lots of case studies that we can just write down and start to unpack and really start to learn from it. And you go, oh, wow, I see that now.
Yeah, those frustrations are hard to deal with by definition, but they're also opportunities, I suppose. So if I've been carrying around frustration about unspoken expectations, how am I going to have to think about things differently?
Yeah, it's very short, simple. Move out of assumptions and move into explicit agreement. Period. And even if you feel like you're overdoing it, you can check in. A team that's been even doing the same thing for a while, and say, okay, just pause before we set up for the surgery. Just want to be clear. Like, you are going to go set up A, B, and C. You guys are going to do that. I'm going to go finish my notes. And then once I'm done with my notes, I'll come back. Once you guys are set up, we'll induce the dog. Yep, got it. Cool. Like, there's nothing wrong with even restating what has even been done many times before, just to always make sure everyone's on the same page. And It's actually a gift because then people are very clear. They're like, yep, got it. And off they go with confidence and clarity, knowing that what to do, knowing they're going to do a good job. And if you have that team member who rolls their eyes and is like, "Oh, whatever, we've done this a million times," too bad,
Right.
right? Like, okay, let them not like the clarity. That's not your problem, right? We each choose how we're going to show up. And so I would just say to start showing up inside of clarity and not assumptions.
Yeah, that's great. I think that we have to do an episode sometime just on basic communication skills, because I think that that's this is right in there. To have things that are unspoken, we need to learn how to speak well, I suppose, and communicate things well.
Good point.
What comes to mind with this too is that, especially over time, and you like me, like in my practice, I've had, of course, there's somebody who's pretty new on staff, and so they may not understand the rules of how we do things. And then there are others that have been around, for a decade sometimes, and you could have several people that are seasoned staff people, and there's a line there somewhere where this is kind of how we operate. Here's maybe once upon a time there was an agreement, but yet everybody comes at it with their own personality. And so, I do that, but I kind of do it my way. And sometimes I think with the best of intentions, my way, I'm so familiar with everything and I just kind of tweak things. If a shortcut that works for me can, without check-ins, could possibly actually kind of get out of hand, perhaps, where there's, again, best of intentions, everybody's trying to do their own thing, and maybe it may end up working in the end. But if you take 2 or 3 people who have their own ways of doing things that were aligned once upon a time, then you have a new person on board, it can get messy. And it seems like that's again, and I say this, I keep saying like without any ill will, because I think so many people, everybody, the benefit of the doubt, people are trying to do the right thing. But sometimes without these check-ins, it can get out of hand.
Absolutely. And I think what you said with new employees, it is so important to have consistency in training. And very often you can have 3 people who are all doing it subtly their own way, but big picture the same way. And that works. That's fine. It doesn't matter. But when somebody's being trained and person A says this, person B has that, person C does it this way, it can be extremely confusing. And then what starts to happen is that the new person starts to get corrected by someone. And they're like, but so-and-so told me to do it this. Well, that's not how we do it. Well, okay. And then the next time the other person says, why are you doing it this way? Well, the other person told me to do it. Well, that's not how I do it. And that can start to really put a new employee into a no-win situation. And we do not want that.
No. And that sounds like you're a half step away from gossip in the break room, from what should be an avoidable problem.
Yeah.
An avoidable
Exactly.
friction. Well, great information here. A lot of stuff to unpack. And of course, this is a podcast, so it is the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about unspoken expectations. There's a million more questions we can kind of go into. I will say, if you or somebody on your team or other colleagues that you have that have questions about this, let us know. Give us a comment. Let us know if there's anything else you want to go a little bit deeper on. And specifically, Jennifer, if somebody wanted to kind of do a deep dive with you on this, like, how are they going to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So just like what you said, feel free to reach out to us, LinkedIn, any place, with any questions or topic requests. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Jennifer Edwards, with Dr. with a DR. My website is drjenniferedwards.com. And if anybody out there wants to discuss how I can support you in coaching, leadership programs, or speaking, just feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk.
All right. Thanks for joining us, and check in next time. And until then, talk about those expectations.
And how can we find you, Aaron?
You can find me at projectvetspan.com and on LinkedIn, of course. I do consult with individual vets and teams on helping build their physical and emotional resilience. And this is very much a part of that. So this is a great topic.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.